Okay, so we're going to finish sewing the other side of the snap on so that these two sides can snap together. Now, this other side of the snap is a little less obvious about which side needs to go down. So the little nipple, we call it, needs to face the fabric so that the hole is facing up. That way, the other side is able to fasten into it. So we want to make sure that that nipple is facing down. And we're going to do the same thing with the knot on the good side of the fabric, covered then by the other side of our snap. And we're just going to come up through the hole and then down through the fabric and up through the hole and down through the fabric. You see that? Nice and easy, nice and clean, but still nice and secure. And one more hole. There we go. And then we're just going to finish it up with our regular knot. 2 for good measure as always. And then hide our little thread tails. There we go. All right, and now we are able to snap those together. Just like that. Perfect. All right, so we have our third piece of muslin folded once on each side and then again on each side. What we're going to do next is the ladder stitch. So it's a stitch that will bring 2 pieces of fabric together. Imagine a neckline that needs to be closed up, a V-neck neckline that needs to be sewn up together. That's the kind of stitch that this would be perfect for, where we're going in, back and forth, and trying to make it completely invisible, which makes it very difficult to do on the sewing machine. Now, before we do that, we're going to rethread so that we have a little more thread to work with. And we're going to sew our hook and eye onto this piece as well. Again, normally a hook and eye is going to go in a place where the fabric is going to join, so that's why folding this piece of muslin this way makes it easier to use. All right, let's get ourselves waxed. Pull that through. Quick hit with the iron. Perfect. And then knot off. All right, let's start with the hook and eye. So we're going to start on the wrong side of the fabric, or the inside of the garment, and we're going to put our knot there because we don't want that to be able to show through the loops of our hook and eye. So doesn't matter which side you start with, the hook or the eye. We're going to hold that in place right there with our thumb or our fingernail, and we're going to come up, catching the fabric and coming through the hole. And I would say with the double thread that I want to come through 3 times on each side. And again, we don't want to spread it out. We really want to keep it looking clean. We really want to keep it looking nice and clean. And then we're going to slide our needle over to the other side. And we're going to come up again, catching the fabric and that hole. And 3 times I think should do it. Carefully trying to hold down that hook, which is a little tricky to do because they tend to be so small. But using our fingernails, if we can, to hold that down. right, and making sure that it's clean, there's no loose thread, nice and tight. And then for the hook side, I like to slide my needle up through the middle of the fabric underneath the hook. And the reason I'm going to do that is because I'm going to put one more safety stitch on the inside of the hook. You see that? So I'm wrapping it on the inside of the hook, barely able to see it, and then coming back down through the fabric. So when I pull that through, like this, it's just going to secure that hook so that it's not flopping around. You know how sometimes hooks can really be kind of movable, and we really don't want that. We want it to be very much stationary. So you see that there? And then we're just going to knot that off on the back side. And again, this is going to be, choosing a matching thread color will be really important because there's no good way to really hide the thread and the stitching in this case. So as best we can, choosing a matching color thread is really the only way we're going to be able to make those stitches blend right in. Alrighty, let me just, I'm a little bit tangled here. Maybe I needed to remelt my thread. Yes, that helped. That made it nice and smooth. All right, and one more knot. Perfect. All right. So that's good. I always like to knot the thread off as soon as I clip it so that I'm ready to get sewing the next piece, and that's what it's going to look like. This one I have coming off the edge of the fabric. Sometimes it will be, sometimes it won't be. Just depends on the garment. Okay, so now we've got that on that side, and we want to line up our eye so that we can make sure it's going to be right where it needs to be to hook right in place. And we're going to come up from the back, leaving our knot in the back this time. And we're just going to come straight up through. This side is, I find, a bit easier because we're just literally going to go 3 times through, and I'm going to slide my thumb under here so that we're not sewing all the way through, theoretically, to the front of the garment. I'm going to hold that in place right there and try to make that a little bit easier. Oh, I did do that. Ha! I did sew up to the front of the garment, which is not what I want to do. So I'm going to clip that in place and re-knot it from the back, and let's make sure that when I pull it through, I'm where I want to be. Good, good. That releases there. Because again, if you can imagine, this would be the place where you would be sewing a hook and an eye, maybe at the top of a zipper at the back of a garment. So we want to make sure that we are not sewing the front and the back of the garment together. Okay, there we go. 2 and 3. Perfect. And then over to here, over to the other side, just like this, hiding the needle and the thread so that you can't see the travel over to the other side. And then again, grabbing a little bit of fabric and the middle of the eye, going 3 times through, and then catching a little bit of that thread so that we can make our knots. A little bit more, because I like to do 2 always. Alrighty, and then just hiding our threads like we always do, hiding our thread tails like we always do. There we go. All right. Knot that off so that we can get ready for our final stitch. And let's just test it out just to see how it works. There we go. Perfect. All right, now we're just going to weave that together because no reason not to. And we're going to do now our ladder stitch. So what I like to do is, if there is a fold or something, a way to hide that knot very much inside, I like to do that. So let's start by going through the crease so that we can't see the knot on the inside or the outside. Then I'm going to press this once more. Make sure it's really tight and close, because we want these edges to meet perfectly. We don't want them to overlap. The most often scenario that I'm using this stitch is for a slit in a dress that needs to be closed for modesty usually, and the same with a deep neckline that needs to be closed for modesty is usually the reason. And I do end up doing this quite a bit. Slit comes up too high or neckline comes down too low, and we just want the fabric to meet, but we don't want to overlap because that looks sloppy. And we want the thread to be, and the stitching to be totally invisible if possible. So what I'm doing here is grabbing a tiny bit through each crease of the fabric, through each fold. Can you see that there? When I pull it through, it will be a little easier to see. And you can take this obviously one stitch at a time, but we're going to go through one tunnel, we'll call it, and we'll do that one stitch at a time, and then through the other tunnel, almost right exactly in the same place, versus offsetting the stitches, because we really want this to be strong. Okay, now as I've done it here, because we're using the red thread, you can see it, but hopefully when matching the thread color with the garment, it will be much harder to see where it is. So after I've done a few more of these stitches, I'm going to hold this up to show you what it looks like. See how down here you can see the stitches, but then these few, it's very difficult to see. That's what we want. And we also don't want any puckering. You see, you can see a little bit of puckering that I did at the top there. We really want to try to keep this extremely flat, extremely smooth. And the best way to do that is just like this, to have an iron nearby, to be pressing in place, to have a nice flat surface to work on, and to just keep trying to gently go through that tunnel, the tunnel of that crease. Okay, now that's getting better, that's getting better. So let me do a few more stitches here. And the way to keep that thread also invisible is, before I pull that tight, you can kind of see, that's why they call it a ladder stitch. It kind of looks like a ladder. We want the stitches to look like a ladder, straight across from each other. And one more stitch on this side. Okay, there we go. Almost invisible. And once we knot it off, should be pretty strong. Now I like to hold this tight and flat, give the thread a nice good tug to make sure that it is nice and tight without buckling. And then I like to try to lift up the inside of the garment and do one stitch that kind of brings the thread to the inside. You see, like that, brings the thread to the inside of the garment, and then take one more small stitch, only catching the lining, whatever it is, only catching the lining there, and do our knot. And the reason we want to do this is because we really want to hide this knot, especially in a place like a neckline. We really don't want you to be able to see where it starts and finishes. And then I'm going to hide my thread tails like usual. So let me pull this through so that we can see. Okay. Perfect. And see, we have our knot there, and then our thread tails where I'm just about to clip. Okay. And then this is what it will look like when it finishes. The best way to do this is to have the knot finishing, if it's at a neckline, closer to the waist, because then it's just less obvious to see. All right, and so our finished hook and eye and ladder, pressing, key to sewing. If you are pressing with steam as much as you are sewing, you will be a beautiful seamstress. All right, that is everything for the hand sewing lesson. And as a practical, doing either the whip stitch or the catch stitch or the ladder stitch on an actual garment would be the best way to practically apply, or all three of them, to practically apply these techniques in real clothing. It's the best way to learn. Thank you all for joining me. Have a great week.